Get out the insurance cards, get out the copays. The office is open, my friends. Brought to you by drroto.com.
What is up, and welcome into a special off-season edition of the One and Done Show. I am Eric Romoff. You can catch me on those Twitter streets at FantasyNav. He is the captain of our ship, Mr. Mike Holland, and we are going to do things a little bit differently here tonight. Last time we were here, we were breaking down the showdown slate for the national title. This was before Kansas ultimately arose victorious and took home the trophy as a result of this year's March Madness tournament. And now, in the weeks that have passed since, it has been absolute chaos in the world of college basketball. So if you're looking for a place to really wrap your hands around everything that's gone on, this is the place to do that. The other place to do that, over at drroto.com, Mike himself has created his big board, the 35 top players that are already in the transfer protocol. We've had about better than a dozen or so already select their new homes for next season. We're going to talk about some of them specifically. Even in that intro, there's a lot going on there. The state of college basketball is absolutely madness, even though it is not March. And to break it all down, Mike Holland. Mike, tell us a bit about the state of the state in this men's game in the college basketball ranks. How has the transfer portal been so active? How has the strategy for these teams building changed in the recent years? And how do you make sense of all of it over the course of the offseason?
Yeah, and I'm joined by Rody too here, man. Our guy just will never let us just have a regular show, right? It's got to get his 2 cents in. Yeah, man. What's crazy is, yes, March was complete madness. Great Final Four. Amazing job to Kansas there. Funny enough, Remy Martin being one of the big transfer portal guys last year was a huge part of their success in the tournament and then ultimately taking down the title. And then if you look on the other side, I don't know where North Carolina would have been without Brady Manick coming over from Oklahoma. So it is a huge deal. The foundation of most programs is going to be through the high school ranks, but if you're looking for that last piece or couple of pieces, or just looking for a straight rebuild, you can kind of get that done nowadays. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. You look at my Horns last year, consensus winners of the transfer market, and ultimately the pieces just didn't fit. The style of play just didn't fit some of these guys like Marcus Carr. It could work a number of different ways. So definitely look at fit. Definitely look at who's on the roster there, how the pieces all play together, and Kansas and North Carolina definitely were able to address their biggest needs. And, obviously that kind of showed as we ended the year here. For me, it's just kind of, tracking who's in the portal. It just seems like there's news almost every day, guys changing teams. NIL is a big deal right now. A lot of these mid-major stars making the move. You look at the transfer market, and just with the additional COVID year, there's a lot of waivers that are being passed out. So just a lot going on, and we're just here to kind of wrap our heads around some of this for you guys, and kind of make sense of it, not only on a just a macro level, but look at some DFS level, maybe some conference, how this affects the conference. So definitely looking forward to talking about some of these stories here.
Yeah, you mentioned Remy Martin. You mentioned Manick, right? Specifically looking at Remy, he was that X factor guy for this Jayhawks team as they were making this title run, right? So it's interesting, and where I want to get your thoughts specifically is, why is there seemingly so much more transfer activity this offseason than we saw last offseason, right? We saw a select handful of teams get a few more pieces here and there. This year, it feels like every single team is essentially shuffling the deck, right? So what do you attribute that to? Is it something that you think is maybe just kind of a blip on the radar and the market will sort of stabilize? Or do you think it's something that is going to be a trend to continue for years to come?
Yeah, it's just kind of funny. Like every year for the past 3-4 years, the number of transfers that have entered the portal here just keeps going up. I think you're finding that the one-time transfer rule that was put into effect is allowing these guys to obviously not sit out a year. And then you're getting a lot of guys that have transferred. Devin Askew from Texas just went back into the portal. He just transferred from Kentucky to Texas last year. And, these guys are, Dawson Garcia, same thing. He's going to Minnesota via from Marquette over to North Carolina last year, getting a waiver. Different circumstances for different guys. So it's just there's a lot different NCAA than what we've used to seeing, right? Guy transfers, and it's a major deal. You're having to sit out a year, but guys are just getting clearances and getting that one-time transfer rule. So now they're pretty much just kind of able to pick what they want to do. And it's honestly, it's about time, right? Coaches can kind of do the same thing. Coaches do the same thing, right? We see them all the time. You kind of jump up the ranks here and end up finally at a Kansas. I think it's the coaches that can really take advantage of the portal and mix it in with your recruiting. Like, you look at it now, Roy Williams was the recruiter for pretty much most of the core roster there for North Carolina. You had RJ Davis and Caleb Love, Baycott's there, but then you bring in someone like Brady Manick. Great job, Hubert Davis, bringing them in as that stretch four. Now all of a sudden you've got the dynamic four that's able to ride. You're able to ride all the way to the championship game. So it's just definitely really about the pieces, how these coaches can make them fit, who's able to recruit the best combination of high school talent and transfer portal talent.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and I'm glad you pointed back to the specific addition of Manick and how this Tar Heels team was really one of the Cinderella stories, even though they're a storied franchise in this year's tournament. And I actually want to stick there for our opening segment. We've got a lot of conversation about players changing scenery and changing teams, but arguably the biggest story for this offseason, at least for me, has more to do with guys staying put, and specifically staying put for these Tar Heels. What do you make of what this offseason has looked like for the Tar Heels, and tell us a bit more about how it ultimately will affect their play on the court?
Yes, I think obviously with the the heartbreaking loss there at the end, just the injury to Baycott. NIL deal probably pretty sweet here. The draft stock probably wasn't it's just, it doesn't have a ton of NBA upside. A lot of the NBA likes to stretch big men. He's more of your traditional big man, but the money that you can make now with these NIL deals, he's probably got a pretty sweet check coming to him. I can imagine a lot of Tar Heel fans are going to have Baycott jerseys, especially after the way that he just battled it out. Definitely not anywhere near 100% in that title game, and still balled out. So, obviously huge news, right? Not just for the ACC, but just nationwide, right? Here he comes in. He's going to be a National Player of the Year candidate. 16 points, 13 rebounds, right? Man, you bring him back, and then RJ Davis is coming back. You're still waiting on these from Caleb Love, but you get Leaky Black coming back as well. And man, we expect these guys, if Caleb Love announces that he's returning, you look at North Carolina as going to be one of the favorites to make it back to the Final Four. They're also bringing in a pretty solid recruiting class, ranked number 20 right now on Rivals. So just some more influx of talent coming in as well. So it's definitely interesting that with all the news that's kind of happened over the last week, probably the biggest effect has been Baycott announcing that he is coming back to take another run at this. And these guys are going to be plenty motivated after the end of last year.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it all plays out, right? Like we've gotten accustomed to these marquee franchises, these marquee.
Your mic is out, I think, brother. I think we lost our guy Eric here, but just talking about how Hubert Davis is going to kind of handle these expectations. Last year they really didn't have any expectations, so obviously in North Carolina you always have expectations, but there wasn't this expectation that he was going to immediately take them to the Final Four. I think it's pretty big that, now we're going into this season. How is North Carolina going to handle all the pressure, all the expectation that kind of wasn't there until really you got toward the conference tournament and then during that tournament run. So definitely interesting. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about like DFS and how this affects, us playing, during the college season. And obviously Baycott's going to be a guy that is probably going to be five figures pretty much every night, be in that 10K range. So his floor is going to be massive. His ceiling is going to be massive in most games. I hit 30 plus double doubles last year. So when you look at it from a DFS perspective, no matter who's coming in or who's playing, he's going to be on the floor at pretty much 35 minutes a game next year, and he's going to be racking up DFS points, and we're going to be using him a lot. So I think we got you back, man. Are you with us?
Yeah, we'll see, right? Take a few weeks off, and all of a sudden the audio devices don't want to play nice. I'm glad you jumped right in on the DFS perspective, because Baycott is a player that we were rostering and firing up seemingly every week. I would imagine that's going to be the case more often than not again next year. Maybe they flirt with like 11K plus pricing and we can get a little bit less exposure to him. But I am curious to get your thoughts, right? With so many players returning, it almost feels like the antithesis of the one and done rule, where most teams had their best players exiting after a year. Now a team that was in the national title game is going to return several prominent players and have an incoming recruiting class. Do you think that we'll end up seeing Coach Davis putting that emphasis, putting the majority of that rotation and playing time back towards the returning guys? Or how do you think maybe some of this recruiting class would kind of weave in and potentially chip away at some of their roles from the season that just ended?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be an interesting storyline for him, right? I mean, obviously you're going to get a lot of minutes to, RJ Davis here, Leaky Black's going to be on the court, and you're going to get Baycott. Those guys are all going to play 35 minutes, and if Love comes back, you're going to want to get him on the court 30, 35 minutes. I think it makes them more dangerous by adding some of these key high school players here, because they basically had no bench last year. I mean, you saw when Love fouled out against Baylor, they barely survived that one. You saw when Baycott was injured, there was really not that other big man that could really come in. They had to go small. We saw your boy Puff Johnson out there wheezing after 15 minutes on and puking on the floor, which was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen during really any basketball game. So that was definitely interesting. But I think there's definitely going to be a role here for Hubert Davis to kind of carve out for some of these incoming guys. Who knows? They're probably not done in the transfer market. They're probably still looking for some quality pieces in here to make this whole thing fit, but also think we have to pay attention to the Caleb Love news. But the biggest thing is, they're going to be pretty good with the core of RJ Davis, Leaky Black, and then this news for Baycott coming back.
So one thing that I want to keep an eye on and also get your thoughts on, with this incoming recruiting class, right? Many of them were coming in under the expectation that they were going to get substantial run in a storied franchise. Now, several of them are going to be looking back at kind of bench and rotational roles. Do you think we maybe see some of these guys bounce out sooner rather than later when they're not getting the playing time that they were seemingly promised?
Yeah, I think that's what we saw, last few years for a lot of teams, honestly, is whenever you have a problem with too much talent, right? Some guys that even the 9th and 10th guy, they want to play. So you'll see guys, transfer down into mid-major. You'll see guys transfer over. We see a ton of these guys, right? I mean, there's plenty of Power 5 players on our transfer board that we have right now that seemingly just looking for different opportunities, right? So, it's going to be on the head coach, right? How he can manage the team, how you can manage different personalities, where you can find playing time. Obviously, there's some blowouts at the beginning of the year. How do you handle that? They're probably they're probably going to get Baycott and all the accolades too. So it's going to be it's going to be an interesting job. That's not really something Davis had to worry about last year, because you essentially knew the 4 guys that were going to be on the floor for 35 minutes, and then you knew he just had to figure out the other piece right there, right, on a game by game basis, or if there was foul trouble. But I think depth is never a bad thing, right? Winning kind of cures all, right? For the most part, at least during the season. I think when you have some teams struggle, the middle of the season, you'll start to see guys, drop out and maybe, go ahead and start their transfer process. But, people want to play for a winner too. So, if I told you, hey, you're an incoming freshman and, your next year you would be receiving 30, 35 minutes, but you have a chance to win a national title playing 15 to 20. I mean, it's still a pretty good sell, right? I mean, that's what makes these programs so strong. but definitely different because you got guys like Duke or one and done. They had out, and you got a new crop of incoming freshmen. So it's definitely different, especially if Caleb Love comes back, because you essentially have the same 4 guys that soaked up all the minutes last year. So yeah, that's something to watch for during the year. And well, that's why he gets paid the big bucks, right?
Yeah, certainly does. And speaking of teams with too much talent, specifically the next team I want to talk about, the issue there is that the former head coach, Tom Crean, had no idea what to do with that talent. He has now been invited to not work there any longer. Mike White has come in and has actually done a pretty good job of holding on to some pieces that were certainly in jeopardy heading into the offseason. Tell us a bit more about the Bulldogs and what their team looks like for this year to come.
Yeah, so Georgia, right? Man, they were a lot of fun to play in DFS last year, but just kind of watching them. I mean, Tom Crean just played at that phonetic pace, and the wheels will just fall apart there. The one guy that we had kept our eye on, right, was Kario Akendo. Man, looked like a rock star some of these games. 33 at Texas A&M, 26 at a really tough defensive team in LSU. 25 against Florida at home, another tough defensive team, actually against Mike White. So he definitely saw firsthand how much he needs this guy. Just kept getting better and better as the year went on. We initially put our top 25 out last week. We had him slotted at the number 10 spot for our transfer portal list. And he went ahead and decided to remove his name, and that's probably the biggest recruiting job that Mike White could ever do for this offseason is getting this guy back into the fold. Super athlete, really exciting player to watch, can really fill it up. Just it's definitely a key piece. It would have been interesting to see if he had gone elsewhere, but he's wanting to help Mike White build a program here, and I think it's interesting, right? A few days later, you get the news that the Bradley star, the guard here, Terry Roberts, he jumps into the fold. This guy can really kind of do it all. Is a really nice guard here. Averaged 14 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. His first team, all Missouri Valley. And funny enough, these 2 guys played with each other in JUCO at Florida Southwestern State. So, kind of an interesting backcourt duo, right? You're going to see, Roberts here playing the point, Akendo playing that 2 guard. Definitely more dynamic than what they had last year already. Mike White's going to have, a lot of work to do because I believe it was up to 9 guys into the transfer portal when Crean left. Obviously, when you have head coaching changes, it's going to be massive turnover anyway. But this is a good place to start for him. It's in the backcourt.
So looking at this team, you mentioned it a bit, right? Crean was absolutely just sprinting these kids up and down the court. How does Mike White coming in potentially change the scheme and the system that this Georgia team is going to run? And how does that potentially impact the guys that we want to either target or potentially avoid in the DFS game?
Yeah, I mean, how many times do we see it? It's like, man, Georgia, we love to play guys against Georgia because the pace was just so fast. Mike White, going to slow this thing down a little bit here and not going to quite play as frenetic as Tom Crean did here. I think from a DFS perspective, really, obviously, it all depends on pricing, so we're kind of just, scatter shooting here, but still think one of these 2 guys each and every night, depending on price, you're probably going to want to get them in, especially when the totals are above 140. They're just that dynamic. Especially at Akendo. I mean, you saw his ceiling with just points alone, and then Roberts can kind of do everything for you. So, these guys are going to have 30, 40 fantasy point nights. Really just going to have to look at matchup and determine, which one of these guys can really expose that matchup as, possessions aren't going to be quite as plentiful as a Crean system here. But yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see when pricing finally rolls out and what this team's going to look like. But this backcourt's pretty exciting for a team that you thought was going to be a 2 to 3 year rebuild job. So I'm not expecting the challenge for an SEC title. When you bring these 2 guys back, you can definitely have a chance to win some games here.
Yeah, sticking to the DFS side, if I learned one thing very quickly in my introduction to CBB DFS last year, it's that it takes the algorithm a couple of weeks to catch up. So specifically, I'm looking at Terry Roberts, right? Usually the players outside of the Power 5 conferences are a little bit less expensive than those that are within. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him open up at pricing near where he finished last year. And if that's the case, he's going to be a fantastic value until that algorithm catches up. So something to just put a little fold on the corner of the page and go back to when we start building here in a few months. As we continue to roll the ball forward, and an interesting couple of teams that are in transition. Shout out to our guy Petey the Pirate. East Carolina is going to be without one of their better players as they lose a commit over to UConn. Why don't you tell us about who's leaving, where they were sitting on your big board, and how this changes the dynamic for both teams?
Yeah, so stud guard Tristan Newton decided to commit to UConn on the 13th of this month. Additionally ranked him in the top 25, probably higher than some people had him. I have him number 5. Just watched this kid play a lot. A really dynamic player. 6'5", like he can really kind of do a lot of different things. Maybe I have a little bit more of a passion for these bigger guards since we have so many little guys running around here doing things. But just a solid player. Averaged almost 18 points, basically 5 rebounds and 5 assists. Kind of as a do-it-all player there for East Carolina. Didn't have very many weapons around him. Right now we have him sitting at number 7 on our top 35 board. And that board that we're doing is essentially going to reach the top 50 mark here. So we're just kind of building this out as the portal grows. So yeah, definitely a great get here for Dan Hurley, right? You look at them coming into the offseason, you knew you were going to have Adama Sanogo, which is your guy, right? And so he's going to be there. We're going to play him a lot in DFS. He's going to be a stud. Should have an all-conference type season. And now you give him Tristan Newton, who is, I'm expecting big things out of him. UConn lost a lot. Tyrese Martin, that really tough defender, just kind of the heart and soul of the team. He's moved on. RJ Cole's taking sounds to the NBA here. And that's exactly where Newton's going to kind of slot in, right? So definitely expecting UConn, who finished 4th in the Big East here. It's going to be a little bit wide open. I mean, obviously you're going to have Providence. You always have Villanova, and you've got someone like Marquette who had played a bunch of young guys kind of sneak up there. But it's kind of wide open to me right now. Obviously, things could change in a hurry with the transfer market and just different things that kind of happen, injuries. Speaking of injuries, I mean, Villanova's dealing with the Justin Moore thing, right? So, just a lot of interesting things going on in the Big East. And the big thing is obviously Tristan Newton coming over and essentially just slotting right into that RJ Cole role.
Yeah, and yet again, right, someone coming from one of the mid majors is likely to be underpriced for the first few weeks of the season. So something to keep an eye on there. The next situation I want to talk about is actually the inverse. We have someone heading from a Power 5 conference to a mid-major program, but getting a pretty significant uptick in terms of their situation and their scoring potential. Tell us about the number 8 guy on your board, at least when we started the transfer season.
Yeah, so you got Curbelo. Andre Curbelo, man. It's just saying the name just like really hurts me from this past season. Had really high expectations. A lot of people had massive expectations for him. Debuted at number 8 in our transfer pool here, leaving Illinois. Just a weird year, right? Started off with the injuries, and then he came back, and it just didn't look like he fit. And he just saw the transfer portal written all over this one. We got him number 10 now in our top 35, but some other guards have kind of come onto the portal here. So, man, if you just looked at what he did 2 years ago, you'd be like, man, this guy's going to be a superstar, right? A little tough with turnovers sometimes to kind of bear for a coach here, but he's coming over to a system where it is absolute run and gun, right? Mike Anderson doesn't really care. It's get the ball up and down, get the ball in the basket. I mean, how many times from a DFS perspective were we just jamming in multiple St. John's guys and the guys that they were playing and making some money off of it? So, it's going to be interesting to follow him. I think he's just so interesting in the fact that, like, can he get back to where everyone thinks he can get? And is this the right place here? Because he's going to be teaming up with Posh Alexander, and that's going to be a very interesting – I mean, we're going to roll out a 2-point guard lineup, which, the NBA is doing a ton of that. You do see that some in CBB, but to have 2 guys that, really just like to have their ball in the hands a lot, it'll be interesting to see how they kind of play together.
Yeah, it really should. And with Champagne heading out, It does create a pretty big void in this offense and in this scheme. So definitely should be plenty of food on the table for both of these guys to eat. The last thing that I want to talk about, or should I say you want to talk about, is the number one rated player on our big board over at drroto.com, and someone who I kind of get the feeling that you just want to make a case for why he should choose your Texas Longhorns. Tell us about Kendrick Davis.
Yeah, outside of him having interest in the Longhorns, he is definitely a stud guard. 20 points per game, can get you some assists, was the American Athletic Conference Player of the Year. So definitely not a slouch. He's been great for the last couple of years. Surprised he's not really testing the NBA is much harder than what it seems. Seems like he is going to make this transfer. He's narrowed his list down. He had just a ton of teams from like Duke, North Carolina. It seems like he kind of wants to stay home though. So you're getting you're getting our guys here, Houston, TCU, Kansas, Texas Tech, Memphis, Gonzaga, and my Horns are in the mix here. It seems like he wants to stay in the state of Texas. If you look at it that way, right, it's going to be obviously Texas, TCU, Houston, Texas Tech. So going to make a decision here on April 22nd. This is going to have a huge impact, right? Somebody's going to be getting an elite guard. Obviously, if he picks one of the Texas schools for DFS appeal, it's not that great. But, I mean, he's playing with SMU in that tough conference anyway, where a lot of teams don't play very fast. So it didn't really affect him too much. I mean, he was still putting up 35, 40 fantasy points. So it's just going to be interesting just determining who he picks in Texas. If it's a school like Texas Tech who likes to share the ball and doesn't really have the one guy. Same thing with Texas, just a bunch of guys that they try to get involved. It'll be interesting for his DFS appeal, but I think overall, I think coaches are going to realize you have to get you got to get the ball in this guy's hands, right? I mean, these other options here, man, if he goes to one of these teams like Kansas, Memphis, or Gonzaga, it's like, man, we're just going to be jamming them in, right? Pretty much on a nightly basis in DFS. Actually, those teams are going to like to get up and down the floor. So, number one on our big board, man, the kid's just a baller. You put on this film for 2 minutes, you're like, wow, man, this is an electric college basketball player.
Yeah, there's a couple of things at play here. Like, first, his decision to not at least explore the draft and to stay in the college ranks for another year just screams NIL, right? Like, if he didn't have the ability to monetize his fantastic 2021-22 season in the college ranks, dude's gone, right? He's going to go to the draft. He's going to get whatever money he can at the next level. Now he's got the option at not only staying in the college ranks, but potentially making, at least in the short term, more money by doing so. The second, if anybody wants to make it to number one, if any college basketball players are out here watching this stream right now, you want to be number one on Mike's big board, consider UT as you enter the transfer protocol and the protocols. Not necessarily which of these 7 landing spots you want him to go to, but plant your flag for us. Where do you think he plays this upcoming season?
Yeah, man, if I had to pick and I was gambling, I'm really looking at Texas Tech. If we're going with the theme that he's sticking to a Texas school, I just think with the season that Tech really had, and just really the fate. I mean, they play more similar to SMU, where they're tough, kind of a hard-nosed type team. I feel like he's a pretty good fit for them. But man, can we just get him to slide on over to Austin, Texas, and do some things? But if I had to put my money on it, I'm looking at Tech right now with Houston being an absolutely interesting option, because if he goes to Houston, they're probably going to be the number one team in the country, which is one of the weirdest things I ever thought I would say since 5 Slamma Jamma.
Yeah, they certainly will. And I mean, as much as your Longhorns allegiance might not want to admit it, Texas Tech is building a decent little program out there in the sticks of Lubbock. So we'll certainly make a splash wherever he lands. As we finish our entry into the pool and the quick splash that we have made in this offseason edition of the One and Done Show, why don't you close us out? What are kind of your remaining thoughts on the remainder of the offseason? What are you going to be keeping your eye on? And how do you go about kind of deciphering the information as it feels like it is constantly flooding on us.
Yeah, it is flooding, man. I'm like, every time I check Twitter, it's like, oh man, this guy's going here, or this is entered, or this guy just exited. It's a flurry of news, right? I think at the end of the day, right, you just kind of look at it from a macro perspective. Guard play is huge, right? It always has been. It always will be in college basketball. It's how you go deep in the tournament is quality guard play. But we saw this year a lot of like traditional and undersized big men just really be a factor this year. I mean, Timmy's been good for the past couple of years. More of a back to the basket type player. Baycott, back to the. I mean, he's not shooting threes. These are back to the basket type players. Jalen Williams, while he can't stroke it a little bit from outside, I mean, how good was he knocking? I mean, basically, it was him and Trey Wade just absolutely battling the Gonzaga bigs there in that upset win. Huge season from him, and really was the catalyst with JD Note to getting that team to that point in the season. So, David McCormick just came out of nowhere, right, in the Final Four, became the guy that we all thought he could be on a regular basis. So, while it's interesting, if you look at our board, we got a ton of guards, right? And guards are typically to grab a lot of the headlines. Typically, when you have a superstar big that is athletic, those guys tend to go to the NBA after one season because that's, NBA teams that are just absolutely in love with, athletic bigs that can really stretch the floor and block shots. But you look at it here and you got some guys like KJ Williams from Murray State and Johnny Broome from Morehead State. These are really quality bigs that could turn into, a Jalen Williams type or a David McCormick type if they get onto a school that makes a run in the tourney here. So they're two of the most interesting options on our board. Right now, currently we have KJ Williams slotted at the third best player available. Johnny Broome right behind him at number 4. But you can't discount the factor of these guards, right? Kendrick Davis right behind him. Grant Sherfield announced from Nevada, who is absolutely fallen apart as Cambridge entered the portal. Warren Washington entered the portal today compared to Arizona State. I mean, these teams can change night and day, where Nevada was looking like a really good team, and now it's looking like they're in absolute rebuild mode. Grant Sherfield, just a great scorer. Definitely going to be watching where he's going to go in. He could, obviously make splash in whatever conference he chooses. And Tyrese Hunter was kind of out of nowhere for Iowa State. Just a dynamic point guard. Has all conference type ability in the future. He slots in at number 6. It's going to be awesome to see, where these guys end up, what kind of fits they're looking at. We always like to look at it from a DFS perspective. And then finally, you got your guy, David Jones, man. I think to close up the show, I think about 30 minutes before we came on, I sent you the tweet. It was like, he's entered the portal here. So what are your thoughts on your boy?
Man, the only thing that will ever come to mind for me with my dude, David Jones, is that no matter how bad it might seem, how much it might feel like you're down and out, it's never over. David Jones was the facilitator of, at least in my DFS CBB career, the most legendary late swap of all time to sneak over the pay line when I was hanging out in the basement the entire game. So I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for Mr. Jones. I know that with Kendrick Davis, I asked you where your head says he's going to go. Let's go to the other side. Let's go to the heart. If you could pick an ideal landing spot for David Jones, where do you want to see him play this season?
Let's see him go right here behind us. I don't know, man. If David Jones could somehow end up on St. John's, my head would explode from a DFS perspective. Oh, man, just playing him and Carmelo together with Posh would just be – I don't even know if that's legal in some states. But, yeah, I don't know, man. He's super talented. I would love to see him get on with, I don't know if he's like a good fit for like a Duke or UNC, but he gets on someone like Miami. That would be really interesting. So it's gonna be interesting to see what his list drops. But hey, David, if you're watching, listening, man, we got some room down here for you. So
if he makes his way to Miami, he's gonna have to fight off a bunch of 27-year-olds to get playing time. So absolutely. We will close with some shade tossed at the Hurricanes. One of our perennial favorite options to go to in the DFS game. Like I mentioned, this is the first of several episodes that we're going to be doing here over the course of the off season. So make sure that you are sticking with us We'll be out here every couple of weeks as we continue to cross names off of Mike's big board. And as we get a little bit closer into the actual start of the season, I can say from firsthand experience with this sport, with really any sport in the DFS game, the hours and the research that you put in during the off season will pay off in spades when it comes time to actually build some lineups and to put your money on the line. So we're not quite putting it out there yet, but here in a few months, watching this episode is going to help you get that bread.
Thanks for stopping by the office. Get your fantasy prescription by subscribing to the channel and checking out drroto.com. And until the next visit, be well